How is postmodern apologetics different from something like cultural apologetic or imaginative apologetics?
Well, I think there's certainly overlap there. I mean, postmodern refers to the resistance of there being absolute truth. In other words, postmodernism presents truth as a moving target and a self-contradictory target. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, since postmodernism rejects this idea of ultimate truth, it's an easier sell to people who have been brought up on such thinking. It's an easier sell to them to move them away from field expertise, like peer-reviewed material, preferring primary sources over their own opinions, their own likes and dislikes. And so you've got to demonstrate how their approach to a topic implodes. And you say, well, they're not going to care because they're postmodern. Well, you have to show them how their approach to reality, it's ultimately unlivable, because they would never demand their approach to reality from someone that they're encountering or that they have in their circle of friends and relationships. If you had someone who really treated them as though the truth is relative and basically treated them like garbage and expected the friendship to be maintained, they're not going to live that way. And so lessons like that teach them that, my system, even though I may not like the implications of it, but it's really kind of hard to live this out and be consistent and have any expectation at all of being treated well or fairly on a personal or a cultural or a state governmental level. Why would I expect any of that if my worldview is true? And the response is, yeah, that's a good question. Why would you? So postmodern apologetics can't presume that there's sort of a baseline for truth and for sourcing and things like that. So you've got to demonstrate how a different approach is not only helpful, but it's more honest, it's more livable. It's something that if they started thinking about and adopting, it gives them more predictable outcomes just in terms of life. And so I think it's really useful for that reason. But that's kind of a fundamental difference. But culturally and imaginatively, well, what we're doing on this show is imaginative apologetics. It's using things like a TV show to reimagine the gospel story and important principles of Scripture. So in a postmodern world, you're going to have to use postmodern things, but the goal is going to be the same. Get them to ask fundamental questions about, can I even live this out? How does this help me live when I can't expect anything from anybody for any consistent reason? Why would you want to live that way?
It sounds a lot like what a Francis Schaeffer, would do and how he relate to the things. And of course, I'm not a priest by any means, but this idea of showing that your worldview is unlivable, it really gets people shaken to the core and saying, hey, you know what, that might be something to this. Now, I do see the problem when we start talking about those who have swallowed the next bill, and it is this whole idea of post-truth, where they're not even postmodern anymore. They say, well, you know what, you're right, but I don't care.
It's really difficult when someone relates to them in the same way. And you ask questions like, does this make you happy? Does this satisfy you? Why would you choose to live this way? And you have no authority to condemn people who are living the way you recommend to your detriment. Why are you doing this? At the end of the day, why? You're the one making the choice. Why are you doing this? I would venture to guess a lot of these people have just sort of been taught this, and it gives them a means to, quote unquote, live the way they want and not be bothered, with something like as abstract as truth. But I'm willing to think that they've never really thought about it, or if they have, they're probably intimidated to discuss it with their friends because their friends are buying into the same thing. So they really can't have a good, friendly conversation about these things that would be gnawing at them if they ever even, get asked the question.